coming up, a fierce wildfire season in the Mediterranean region destroys hundreds of square kilometers of forests and chases thousands of residents from their homes.
Και ο καπνός ήταν αποδεικτικός, δηλαδή δεν μπορούσες να δεις, δάκρυζαν τα μάτια σου, δεν μπορούσες να αναπνεύσεις.
The Lebanese men and women on the front lines of the firefight as they confront threats coming from within.
Forest fires has been a long-term problem in Lebanon, and the issue is that it's getting bigger and bigger.
And out.
We've been seeing lots of fires happening in the south of the country, in part because of the Israeli rocket fire.
I don't know how to describe it. This is not a normal fire.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now.
This is intentionally, they are trying to burn our land.
The Greek Prime Minister Kyrios Mitsotakis famously said last year that his country was facing a war in a time of peace. He wasn't kidding. The Mediterranean country, because of its location, has been having brutal summers. The heat in June and July were unlike anything the country has ever experienced and has resulted in human deaths and a wicked wildfire season. Residents there are finding it extremely difficult keeping up with weather anomalies. A horrible Meaiki, that's a Mediterranean hurricane, caused deadly flooding late last year, and that came after Greece saw a 16-day heat wave, a record at the time, as well as the EU's largest ever wildfire. This August may again break records. Flames near Athens were so overwhelming and widespread, the more than 700 firefighters involved were forced to focus on localized blazes, saying there was no longer a single active fire front. And the problem is increasing worldwide. In the Northern Hemisphere, the wildfire season typically goes from June till September, but it's been starting earlier and ending later as the years go by, and now burns twice as many trees as were lost in the year 2001 worldwide. Fires that burn more than 40,000 hectares, so-called mega fires, are also on the rise. We talk about what all of this means for the climate.
Forests are major carbon sinks, storing trillions of tons of CO2 captured from the air over thousands of years, until they go up in smoke. Yes, next to the immediate threat to life and limb, the longer-term impacts of rapidly spreading wildfires can lead to an increasingly warmer world. The Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, or CAMS, reported global wildfires emitted more than 2 billion tons of CO2 last year. Compare that to Russia's 2022 emissions as a country, reported at 1.6 billion tons. And wildfire emissions don't stop after they're put out. A recent study of burnt boreal forests in Sweden found charred areas continue to release CO2 for years. In less than 5 years, instruments show they emitted more than twice the carbon of the fire itself. It takes several decades for them to recover and store the same amount again. Early August saw massive fires raging across northwestern and central Canada and the U.S. states of California and Colorado. Fires also threatened communities in Greece and Italy. Brazil's Amazon forest fires are ongoing, and even Australia sees areas burning in wintertime. Worldwide, a network of ground and air patrols, detection devices, satellite tracking, and even phone calls from the public help to detect wildfires and keep them in check. A significant number are detected by fire lookouts, which can catch them when they're as small as 0.01 hectares in size, or less than half the size of a tennis court. Spotters often live alone in their remote lookout towers, high atop hills, from 4 to 6 months of the year, keeping an eye on the horizon. And finding a fire isn't where it ends. Lookouts also help coordinate the response, communicating with other towers and fire teams to locate the fire, report weather changes, and monitor the fire's spread. They're an essential part of a simple equation: the less fires spread, the less they threaten biodiversity and human life, in the short term and the long.
And wildfire response is getting more important as drought kicks up the chance that any spark could spread quickly. One such place is northern Lebanon, where the mountainous terrain, forests, and most of the country's plant species are under the watchful eye of an all-volunteer group of firefighters known as the Akkar Trail Team.
Antonio, as I understand it, forest fires are a long-term problem for Lebanon, with the country losing about 1,500 hectares of forested areas annually. Why are forest fires such a problem for the country?
The issue is that it's getting bigger and bigger unless we can face it in a good way. So it's all about the weather situation, how we are actually dealing with it. So we don't have constant actually numbers of fires annually. You mentioned the number 1,500 hectares. Unfortunately, one of the biggest fires that we've had in 2021 alone took more than 1,500 hectares. So it was just in one region and one fire. In the area I'm from, we have around 370 hectares that we've lost. And we can say that we are still in the first half of the season. We are still in the middle of August. The more we go toward the end of the season, or actually the end of the summer season, the more the things get worse because you have the longer dryness time. It's definitely a big issue. And we hope it will become like things will become easier. But I believe that it's getting a bigger issue nowadays for one of the main reasons, which is the loss of connection between the people and the area they live in. We had a lot of people actually counting on the forest to get their heat, to get all their necessary needs. So this is why forests are actually getting bigger and they are getting more dense, which is the most important issue I can say right now.
Can you just elaborate more on this lost
Yes.
connection? Is that what you're saying? Lost
Yes.
connection?
Yeah,
In a
I can
time
say
where temperatures are warmer than ever, and particularly in the Mediterranean region, what is a lost connection? What are you referring to?
people nowadays are counting on electricity, which doesn't count on the fuel coming from the woods. While if I come back to the days where my parents live, I'm gonna talk about 50 or 60 years ago, they had no electricity, or maybe the bare minimum of it. So they needed wood in order to cook, they needed wood in order to get warm during winter. So this is why they actually needed those forests. So this is why they did not cut big trees. They actually were trimming everything. They were maintaining the forest in a sustainable way in order to keep getting that wood from it for the whole time and not losing that greenery.
Do these denser forests make fires harder to spread, you think?
The denser the forest, the faster the speed of the fire spread. This is the first issue. Second, it is the harder for the teams to go inside the forests in order to extinguish those fires. So sometimes we are even not capable of walking inside the forest. I'm not talking about big vehicles or even small UTVs. I'm talking about walking. It's impossible inside some of the Mediterranean forests. So the type of vegetation we have, the more like when it gets dense, it doesn't allow even small animals to go through it.
Do you feel equipped to protect the forest and all the wildlife they serve?
Definitely fires are getting more intense. And when we are talking about a different activity of the fire, we need different equipment. So we're not talking about fighting the same fire that we've been fighting 20 or 30 years ago.
Can you give an example of what type of equipment you would need today that you
Yes.
wouldn't have had years ago?
Okay, definitely. So I'm going to give a very simple example. Before those intense fires and before that density and before that long summer seasons, small fires had a bit of difficulty to reach the upper part of the trees. So, for example, let's say that someone by arson or by mistake or whatever the reason was, started a fire, then it will maybe spread on the maybe just on the ground. But nowadays, because we have denser fires and denser forests, I apologize, and because we have different summer seasons, so they are getting more intense, then the probability of that fire spreading to the upper part, so we call it a crown fire, of that tree is much, much more likely. So before fighting a small fire, you can use maybe just a small utensil that not even water. You can just extinguish it using any small utensil that you have. Even our grandpas used the parts of the trees just to extinguish it, so to stop the oxygen. So that's it. But nowadays, if it spreads to the top part of the tree, then we're talking about the crown fires. I need much bigger amount of water. We need much better personal equipments because the amount of heat is much more intense. And because the trees are denser, the forests are denser, we definitely need better equipments in order to go inside in order to stop it. So all of these things weren't actually before.
And of course,
Why
those
we-
denser forests make them much harder to reach, the fires at least. How do you detect forest fires, particularly when the forest is so dense?
Lebanon is actually having a very high, I can say, population density. So we're talking about around 6 million people living in 10,000 kilometers squared. That's a huge amount of people. We do not have the issue that, for example, people in Alaska have, or in Russia, or maybe in some states in America, so where fires can extinguish, can actually start for days without even anyone noticing them. No, that wildland and people communication is actually much more present in Lebanon. So I do not believe that there's any fire that would happen in Lebanon that anyone at his house couldn't see. So all the forests, I can say almost, are visible from someone's point of view. This is why our strategy wasn't actually to use satellites, even though it's a strategy used by several governments worldwide. There are several courses made by NASA on how to actually detect those fires and how to follow them up using satellites images. But now in Lebanon, we do not have this issue. So all what you have to do is just to look from your windows and just to call. So that lookout strategy is actually what we are basing our, let's say, prevention method on. So we have
That's
WhatsApp
very
groups.
old school. I'm sure it's effective, but
Definitely.
it's very old school. Do you
Definitely.
wish that you had more advanced equipment at least?
To be honest, it's not needed. We have very scarce resources, and if I want to be very honest, and if I want to be very logical, I wouldn't invest in more, let's say, lookout techniques. Maybe I would hire someone, and this is what's happening, for example, in my village, but it doesn't cost much. I hire 1 or 2 guys just to stand in a lookout bridge and to watch more than 50 kilometers squared of forests, which is okay. And that's perfect, but that's very, let's say, low in budget. Okay, I don't want to go for the cameras. I don't want to go for satellite images. No need for drones. We are so okay in that point specifically. What we lack nowadays may be more mitigation and more preparedness and definitely better response plans. But regarding the lookout, regarding that specific part, I believe you are okay.
The Mediterranean region is one of the fastest heating areas of the planet, and it's getting worse as the years go by. Aren't you concerned that this old school method of just reporting fires when someone sees it will be out of date? Don't you think you will need new equipment later on? Because things will get worse.
Okay. Let's be very logical. We are passing by one of the worst economical situation in Lebanon since maybe its beginning, since the 1920s. So the last 3 years were very, very, very harsh. Nowadays, there are some NGOs and there are some reserves. that had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in putting some sensors inside their places in order to detect the heat, in order to detect the dryness, and in order to detect any fire happening and to even predict it. But would I invest $100,000? I'm not talking about several $100,000 to protect a small reserve while, for example, I'm going to go in numbers. My team has been working for 4 consecutive seasons in more than 150 missions in tens of days for only $70,000, even including the equipment and the vehicles, the skid units, everything. So your question is definitely accurate and logical, but for me, would I invest in that amount only to protect a small area with a few hectares? Or would I, for example, make several teams like the one that we have and even keep that old school method that you've already talked about? For me, I would go for the other option, to be honest. Well, if you give me right now $16 million, I would say yes, definitely. I will go for even better strategies for lookout, and I would invest more in the preparedness and the response plans. But now, with the very scarce resources that we have, I don't believe this is the exact issue that we are facing.
I can hear and quite frankly feel your passion for what you do in your team. Antonio, why did you become a firefighter?
I'm from a town in the northern area, actually at the Syrian border. It's called Kobayat. Since I was young, we faced several fires. I still remember when I had, for example, 10 years old. I was 10 years old. We faced one of the very big fires. It's still in my head. I do remember the area quite well. We've seen the helicopters and stuff like that. And it was quite common to have every single summer season some fires. And we were actually camping a lot. We were hiking a lot. We were still kids, but we liked that area, and we considered fires as one of the main threats that we actually face in our place, and specifically in my village from Kobayat. So this is one of the reasons why I became a firefighter. I'm not a professional firefighter, actually. This is a side thing that I do as a volunteering whenever I have any single free minute. But I'm going to say something which is kind of weird. I know that we have a lot of volunteering everywhere in the world, but in my country, specifically in my village and in my area, in Akkar in general, lots of people are actually volunteering as firefighters. Not necessarily having the good equipment, not necessarily having the good training, but I can simply tell you that whenever you see a smoke which looks a bit dangerous, you can see hundreds of men going toward that point and trying their best to do whatever they can. So I have so many people having trucks, having just the simple, I can say, backpack pumps, the one used to spray pesticide. I'm not talking about something advanced at all. The very cheap one, the $20 one, which is, by the way, very heavy and very annoying, but they are still using it in order to start or to fight those fires. So I'm not the only one. We are hundreds. I can say that even all my friends have at least participated in one wildland fire. So I've gone a bit far with that passion. I've joined the team. I have my special equipments. I'm investing in reading about it, in training worldwide about it. But everyone is participating at least a bit in this field.
It's fascinating.
Thank
Back
you.
in 2019, Antonio, Lebanon saw its worst wildfire season in decades. At least that was what was reported. People describe seeing winds of fire and flames as high as 30 meters. How would you compare those fires in 2019 to what you've seen so far this year?
Okay. This year it's been very bad, definitely. Last year was okay. I believe, and it's not what actually I believe, we have the data from a specific center in Lebanon. It's University of Balamand. They have a specific center for studies of wildland fires. I'm sorry. So they reported that the worst fire that we've ever seen in the recent history in Lebanon is in 2021. Actually, it wasn't in 2019. So we've surpassed the number of that happened in 2020 in 2019. Unfortunately, it was actually in my hometown. We're talking about the biggest single fire. It actually started in my hometown and it spreaded even above or even beyond the Lebanese-Syrian border. So even the Syrians have have actually extinguished that fire. So it was a very big one. So that was actually the biggest fire ever recorded in the Lebanese history. And it was actually the most intense regarding the speed of spread. And this is what climate change is doing. So before that, it wasn't actually something that we are used to. I was actually shocked on that day. It was really terrible. Like having some training, having some knowledge, and sitting like there, not knowing what to do. And even later on, when you do some research, when you sit with some experts, they tell you that you couldn't have done anything unless tell people just to go away from the side of the fire. So that's actually something big. So yes, 2019 was something huge, but 2021 was even bigger. And this is the problem. We're facing it even bigger and bigger through time.
Before I let you go, Antonio, because we're running out of time, we've been seeing lots of fires happening in the south of the country, in part because of the Israeli rocket fire. Can you tell us exactly how much damage is being done down there?
To be honest, those reports are being updated daily or weekly. I'm not 100% sure by the specific government officials. We have a specific website about that are specifying the amount of hectares being burned because of the phosphorus used by the Israeli enemy. So definitely, it's something like I don't know how to describe it. This is not a normal fire. This is not something made by I can say mistakes. Maybe someone was actually trying to get rid of some of the agricultural waste or stuff like that. This is intentionally they are trying to burn our lands for their military reasons, for sure. If they are thinking about invasion, this is what I hear. If they simply are. I wouldn't go much into politics here, but they are making it intentionally just by the purpose of doing harm, nothing more than that. And they are using the type of bombs, which is the phosphorus bombs, that just like you've already mentioned. The phosphorus bomb is banned internationally. We've met several people. We've had actually 2 months ago in national camp for training for wildfires, and we've had some people. Actually, one of them was a doctor, and the others were members of a team of wildland firefighting in the south area. And they were actually describing how bad that was. First of all, one bomb can actually spread up to 800 meters of meters squared of area. This is first. Second, we're talking about fires that can still be extinguishing for several hours, and that phosphorus can only be ignited using oxygen. So even if you come by after a moment and you have just a bit of wind, it will ignite again. And if some people are exposed to it, it actually can burn the skin up to third-degree burn. So we're talking about something extremely harmful. In addition to that, I'm talking about harm which is not only by the fire and the heat. The chemicals that are being used are polluting the land, and you are not capable of using it for agricultural reasons. And I don't know if it can be you can live in those areas for several years after it. So that amount of harm cannot only be measured by the amount of hectares burned. We're talking about a harm which is much, much, much more or much worse than that.
that's our show. We leave you with what remains of a mussel farm in Croatia. Warmer waters have been threatening countless species of marine life, which in turn disrupt the livelihoods of those who depend on them. Residents say July's extreme heat wave was behind huge losses of mussels there.